It was a cold winter evening in 2022, in the bustling city of Chicago, when everything changed for Michael. He wasn't expecting it, wasn't prepared for it. After all, he thought he had the perfect life. A successful career as a marketing executive, a beautiful wife named Laura, and a cozy apartment in the city they both worked so hard to build together. Life was supposed to be straightforward, easy. But as the snowflakes fell gently outside their apartment windows, Michael's world would come crashing down. One text message at a time. Michael had always considered himself a reasonable man. He was steady, reliable, and trusted his wife implicitly. He had no reason not to. They had been together for over 6 years. Laura was the love of his life. The woman who made him laugh, the one who knew exactly how to comfort him after a tough day. He had seen the signs of a strong, lasting marriage, or so he thought. Their evenings followed the same comforting routine. Laura would finish work, and they'd meet for dinner, often at their favorite Italian restaurant just around the corner from their apartment. A glass of wine, some pasta, and casual conversation were their usual formula for relaxation. Laura was an interior designer, and her days were often filled with creative meetings, client consultations, and brainstorming sessions with her team. Michael, on the other hand, spent most of his time in the office or attending meetings, immersed in the world of numbers, deadlines, and marketing strategies. It wasn't that they didn't have their disagreements, what couple didn't? But their fights were rare, brief, and quickly forgotten. There had been moments when Michael would joke about how perfect their life seemed, how nothing could ruin their happy bubble. It was those moments that now made him feel foolish, as he sat hunched over his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop screen casting an eerie light over his tired face. It all started when Michael's phone buzzed one night after Laura had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of meetings. The message came from an unfamiliar number. His brow furrowed, a small seed of doubt beginning to sprout. He opened the message, thinking it might be some sort of work-related update. But the text he read made his stomach turn. "You know what you did last night? I'll make sure she finds out." Michael's hands shook as he stared at the words on the screen. His heart raced in his chest, and his mind went into overdrive. What was this about? Who was sending this? His first instinct was to dismiss it, maybe even laugh it off. But something about the message felt too real, too specific. It left him with a sinking feeling in his gut. A part of him wanted to ignore it, to move on and forget about it. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, something nagging at him, kept him staring at the screen. He quickly ran a quick search on the number. It was registered to a man named Chris Donovan. But that name didn't ring any bells. He didn't know anyone by that name, and that made the message even more unsettling. The next morning, Michael woke up feeling more unsettled than ever. He kept glancing at his phone, waiting for another message, but nothing came. No text, no calls, no signs of what had happened the night before. Perhaps it had been a prank, he thought, a harmless joke. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that afternoon, Laura had gone out for a client meeting, and Michael found himself pacing around their apartment, lost in thought. He felt the need to confront this, to get answers. After all, he had nothing to hide. He trusted Laura completely. She was his best friend, his partner, the person he'd built his life with. But there was a strange unease settling in his chest. Could it be that he had missed something? Was there something going on behind the scenes that he hadn't noticed? His mind kept returning to the message from the night before. He couldn't stop thinking about it. What did the sender mean by, "You know what you did"? Was there something Michael had done that he didn't remember? The idea seemed ridiculous, but it haunted him all the same. That evening, as the clock ticked closer to dinner, Laura returned home with a tired smile on her face. As usual, she was warm and affectionate, throwing her coat over the back of the couch and telling Michael all about her meeting. He nodded along, offering the usual polite responses, but his mind was elsewhere. He was consumed by the thought of that text message, wondering if it meant something more. And if it did, what could he do about it? "Is everything okay?" Laura asked, noticing his distant expression. She perched herself on the edge of the couch, her eyes soft with concern. "You've been quiet tonight. Michael snapped out of his daze and smiled, trying to shake off the anxiety gnawing at him. Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I guess. Work stuff, you know? He tried to keep his voice light, to mask the suspicion creeping into his thoughts. But something in Laura's eyes made him wonder if she knew, if she was hiding something from him. Laura gave him a reassuring smile and moved closer, resting her hand on his knee. We'll be fine, Michael. You know that, right? We've been through everything together. Whatever's bothering you, we'll work it out. Her words, meant to comfort, only deepened his unease. What was she hiding? He couldn't put his finger on it, but he could feel it. Something had shifted. The trust that had once been unshakable now seemed fragile, like a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest breath. The next few days passed in a blur, with Michael trying to focus on his work, but his mind constantly drifting back to the message. He couldn't forget it. And then, just when he thought he had convinced himself it was nothing, the messages came again. This time they were more direct. She'll find out about last night soon enough. You can't keep this from her forever. Each text hit harder than the last. This wasn't just a prank anymore. Someone was playing games with him, pulling him into a web of lies he didn't understand. But who? And why? His trust in Laura was being tested in ways he never imagined. He began replaying moments from their life together. Every small detail, every interaction, every word she had said to him in the past few months. The cracks in their relationship, the little lies, the missed calls, and the late nights all seemed to point to one thing. Laura was hiding something. The tension in the apartment grew as Michael began to question everything. His trust was being eroded, piece by piece, by these anonymous texts and the growing sense of doubt gnawing at his insides. Was he overthinking it? Or was Laura really hiding something from him? The messages kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that someone knew more than they should about his relationship with Laura. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart would race. Was it another anonymous message? Or was it Laura, trying to explain herself? He couldn't tell anymore. It had been a week since the first text, and Michael's life was spiraling. His days were consumed by work, but his mind was consumed by doubts about Laura. He started noticing small things, little signs that seemed to suggest something was off. Laura had become distant, more distant than usual. She spent longer hours at the office, sometimes coming home late or leaving early. She was more protective of her phone, hiding it face down whenever they were together. The once open and trusting conversations between them had dwindled to monosyllabic responses and strained silences. But the biggest change was in the way she looked at him. There was a coldness there now, a subtle shift that he couldn't ignore. It was as if she was hiding something, a secret she wasn't ready to reveal. Michael tried to confront her a few times, but every time he brought up his concerns, Laura would brush it off with a smile and a joke. "You're just overthinking it, babe," she'd say. "It's work stress, that's all." But Michael wasn't convinced. The doubts kept festering, growing like a wound that wouldn't heal. One night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Michael's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the same unknown number. "I know you don't believe me, but you'll see soon enough. Your perfect little wife has been lying to you. Just wait. You'll find out everything." The message made Michael's blood run cold. It was the same pattern, the same threatening tone. But this time it felt different. Felt personal. Felt like a warning. Michael's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightening. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Without thinking, he stood up and turned off the TV. Laura looked at him, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice light. "I'm going to find out the truth," Michael said, his tone firm. "I need to know what's going on." Before Laura could respond, he was already walking out the door. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't sit idly by anymore, wondering if his life was built on lies. He had to confront Laura, had to get to the bottom of this once and for all. Michael's mind raced as he drove through the streets of Chicago, heading toward the place that had haunted his thoughts for the past week. Radiance Yoga Studio. The anonymous messages had mentioned it a few times. And although he had no concrete proof, the connection seemed too strong to ignore. If Laura had been spending so much time at yoga, maybe that's where things had started. Maybe it was where everything had gone wrong. As he pulled into the parking lot, he tried to steady his breathing. His hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. He just knew he couldn't keep guessing, couldn't keep living in the dark. The studio was closed for the night, but the lights inside were still on. The building looked eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling, vibrant place Michael had seen during the day. He parked and walked up to the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. He was taking a risk, but he couldn't wait any longer. He pressed his face against the glass, trying to peer inside. That's when he saw it. There, standing near the back of the studio, was a tall man with dark hair. Michael's heart skipped a beat when he realized it was Andrew Mitchell, the yoga instructor. Michael's thoughts instantly went into overdrive. Why was Andrew still here? Why was he at the studio at this hour, alone? The same questions from the messages began to surface in his mind, and he couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Laura had been more involved with this man than she had ever let on. With his heart racing, Michael turned around and hurried back to his car. He needed to get home to confront Laura. He had to know if his fears were true. When Michael arrived at his apartment, Laura was already home. She was sitting on the couch, her head buried in her phone as she scrolled through emails. Her usual warm smile was absent, replaced with an air of distraction. "Laura," Michael said, his voice tense, "we need to talk." She looked up at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "What's going on?" "I know you've been seeing him," Michael said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Andrew. I saw him at the yoga studio just now, and I've been getting these messages. I need to know the truth." Laura's face went pale as she dropped her phone onto the couch. "Michael, it's not what you think," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't want you to find out this way." Michael took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "Then tell me everything." For a long moment, Laura sat in silence, tears welling up in her eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Started as just yoga, as just classes. But he understood me in a way you didn't. I felt like I was drowning in my own life, and he made me feel alive again." Michael's stomach churned at her words. This wasn't just about a simple affair. It was about everything he thought he knew about her, about their life together, being ripped apart in front of him. "You lied to me, Laura. You told me it was work. You told me everything was fine. You made me believe we had a perfect life. And now I find out you've been seeing him behind my back." "I'm sorry, Michael," Laura sobbed. "I never meant for it to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "It's too late for apologies. You made your choice." If you're enjoying the twists and turns of Michael's journey, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more updates. Stay tuned for the next part as the truth continues to unfold. The tension in the room was unbearable. Michael stood there, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. Laura was sitting on the couch, her body hunched in shame, her hands wringing in her lap as tears stained her cheeks. She had confessed everything, but somehow it didn't feel like enough. She had apologized 100 times, promised that it was a mistake, an isolated affair. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. "Is that it, Laura?" Michael's voice was quiet, almost eerily calm. "You're just going to sit there and tell me that it's over? That it was just a mistake? That everything we've been through doesn't mean anything?" Laura flinched at his words, as if each one cut deeper than the last. "Michael, please," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought—" "No," he interrupted, his voice growing firmer now. "You didn't think. You let it go too far. You didn't think about how this would destroy everything." He paced the length of the living room, hands clenched into fists at his sides. His mind was racing. There were so many unanswered questions, so many things he couldn't even begin to process. The most painful part wasn't the affair itself. It was the realization that everything he thought he knew about his life with Laura was built on lies. He stopped pacing and looked at her again, his expression hardening. "Who else knows about this, Laura?" She hesitated, her eyes avoiding his. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb," Michael snapped. "Who else knows about you and Andrew? How many other people are in on this secret of yours? Do our friends know? Our family?" "Michael, no one else knows," Laura said, her voice shaking. "It's just been me and him. I swear. Please believe me. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't know what to do." A dark laugh escaped Michael's lips, though it was devoid of any humor. "You didn't know what to do? You were too busy hiding your affair while I worked my ass off to build our life. I was too blind to see what was going on right under my nose. Wasn't I?" Laura's face twisted in pain. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" Michael's words were low, almost a growl now. "Why did you betray me, Laura? Why did you choose him over me?" Laura reached for him, but Michael stepped back, his body tense. He couldn't let her touch him right now. Not after everything. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was lonely, Michael. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. I was suffocating. And Andrew, he made me feel alive again. He made me feel like I mattered." Michael stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just an affair. This was about something deeper, something he had failed to see. But no matter how much pain Laura seemed to be in, no matter how sorry she was, he couldn't ignore what had happened. His trust in her was gone, and he was not sure if it could ever be rebuilt. Character development, the breaking point, the hours following their confrontation felt like a blur. Michael couldn't shake the conversation, couldn't stop hearing Laura's desperate pleas in his head. She was sorry. She didn't mean to hurt him. But every time those words came back to him, they only made him feel angrier. He had trusted her with everything. His life, his love, his future, and she had thrown it all away for a man she barely knew. Later that evening, Michael found himself sitting at the kitchen table, the light above him harsh and unforgiving as he stared at his phone. He kept thinking about the messages, about the anonymous texts that had started it all. Whoever was sending them clearly knew something he didn't, something Laura had kept from him, and that only made him more suspicious. His fingers hovered over the screen as he considered reaching out to the number. But something told him it was time to stop playing games. If he wanted the truth, he needed to go straight to the source. With determination rising in his chest, Michael decided to take action. He needed to find out what was going on with Laura and Andrew, and he wasn't going to wait around any longer for her to give him answers. He was going to take control. Plot progression. A shocking discovery. The next day, Michael couldn't concentrate at work. His mind was consumed by the idea that everything he thought he knew about his life was false. He was a shell of the man he had been just a few weeks ago. It felt like someone had torn the foundation out from under him, and he was struggling to find solid ground. During a break, Michael found himself staring at his phone again. The number that had sent him the cryptic texts was still there. Without thinking, he dialed it. The phone rang for several moments before a voice answered. "Hello." The voice was unfamiliar, but Michael immediately recognized the tone. It was calm, almost amused. Whoever this person was, they weren't afraid of him. "Who is this?" Michael demanded, his voice tight with anger. "What do you want?" "Relax, Michael," the voice said, dripping with sarcasm. "I'm just here to help you see the truth. You've been living in a fantasy world, but that's about to change. Your wife isn't the woman you think she is." Michael felt his breath catch in his throat. "What do you know about her? What's going on?" The voice chuckled softly. "I think you already know. I think you've always known. But now you'll finally see for yourself." Before Michael could respond, the call ended. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone in disbelief. The person on the other end of the line had known something that made his heart race. His suspicions about Laura and Andrew were confirmed, but it was clear that the situation was far more complicated than he had realized. Pivotal moment. The unraveling. The days that followed were a blur of tension and sleepless nights. Michael's emotions fluctuated between anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. He couldn't talk to anyone about what he was going through. He couldn't share the pain he felt with friends or family. This was his mess to fix, and he wasn't sure how to even begin. Then, on the third day after the phone call, something changed. The feeling in the pit of his stomach had shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was the slow-burning desire for revenge. He needed to confront Andrew, to make him see the damage he had done, not just to his marriage but to Michael himself. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the principle, about making sure Laura realized what she had lost. If you're enjoying this roller coaster of emotions, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. Stay tuned to find out what Michael does next, because the stakes are getting higher. Michael had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let this go, and he wasn't going to keep living in the shadows of his wife's lies. It was time to confront Andrew, the man who had torn his world apart without a second thought. No more waiting, no more uncertainty. He needed to get answers, and he needed to do it now. The message from the mysterious caller, "You'll see soon enough," played over and over in his mind, like a broken record. But this time, Michael wasn't going to sit back and let the truth slip through his fingers. He was ready, and he wasn't going to let anyone manipulate him anymore. The next morning, Michael made the decision. He would confront Andrew directly. The idea of facing the man who had been with his wife, the man who had made a fool of him, made his blood boil. But as much as he wanted to act on anger, he knew this confrontation had to be controlled. He couldn't let himself slip into a blind rage. He had to be smart, calculated, to make sure he got the answers he needed. He found Andrew's address through a quick online search and, with an overwhelming sense of urgency, he made the drive. As he approached the address, Michael's heart was pounding. He could feel the tension in his chest, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The neighborhood was quiet. Modern townhomes lined the street, each one neatly kept, with signs of wealth and comfort all around. Michael pulled up outside a sleek, minimalist house with large glass windows that gave a perfect view into the living room. He sat there for a moment, staring at the house, letting the reality of what he was about to do sink in. With a deep breath, he got out of the car and walked toward the front door. He didn't knock. He didn't care. His life had been turned upside down, and it was time for answers. The door opened before he even had the chance to knock. Andrew stood there, looking genuinely surprised, but also calm. He seemed unfazed by the anger Michael was sure must be radiating from him. "Michael," Andrew said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I didn't expect you to come here. What's this about?" Michael's voice was cold, barely controlled. "You know what this is about, Andrew. You've been sleeping with my wife. You've been lying to me, betraying me, and I'm done letting you get away with it." Andrew leaned against the doorframe, his expression one of casual amusement. "I didn't realize you were the jealous type. Your wife and I have been, well, let's say she needed something you couldn't provide." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He had known what had happened, but hearing it from Andrew's lips made it feel even more real, even more unbearable. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his cool. He wouldn't let Andrew see how badly it hurt. "You think this is funny?" Michael's voice was dangerously low. "You think you can just waltz in and take what's mine? You think you can just leave my life in shambles and walk away like it's nothing?" Andrew didn't seem to care about the anger in Michael's voice. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate shrug. "I'm not the one who was blind to what was happening, Michael. You weren't paying attention. You couldn't see it. But that's not my fault. It's on you." A flash of rage surged through Michael, but he held it back. He had to stay focused. He wasn't here to lose control. He was here to get answers. He took a deep breath before speaking again, his voice hard as stone. "I'm not done. You and I are going to have a talk, and it's going to be the truth this time." Character dynamics. Michael's resolve. Andrew let out a soft chuckle but opened the door wider, stepping back as if inviting Michael inside. As Michael crossed the threshold into the house, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disgust. This house, this life, everything about it screamed privilege, but it felt hollow. A reflection of the man standing in front of him. Michael didn't sit. He stood tall, staring Andrew down, refusing to let him think for a second that he was intimidated. "I never wanted this," Andrew said, though his voice lacked any genuine remorse. "But your wife, she's different. She wanted me. She came to me, and I gave her something you couldn't." The connection, Michael, it was real. She felt seen. "We're not the same." Michael's heart thudded painfully in his chest as Andrew spoke, each word digging deeper. But Michael didn't flinch. He couldn't let Andrew see him falter. He had to stand his ground. "I'm done with you, Andrew," Michael said, his voice steady now. "And I'm done with her. What happened between you and Laura, whatever she thinks it was, is over. She's gonna have to live with that. But so are you." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "You think she's going to leave me for you? After everything? Come on, man. Don't kid yourself." "I don't care what she chooses," Michael replied, his voice colder than ice. "But you're not getting away with this. You're going to pay for what you've done one way or another. You're going to see the consequences of your actions." Pivotal moment. Michael's decision. The silence that followed was thick, like the calm before a storm. The air in the room was charged with tension. It felt like everything Michael had worked for was slipping through his fingers. His marriage, his trust, his identity, everything was crumbling. But in this moment, as Andrew stood there, smirking and confident, Michael realized something. He had been blinded by the need for revenge. The anger had consumed him, but it wasn't just about Andrew anymore. It was about Laura. It was about the woman he had trusted, the woman he had shared his life with. He needed to decide what to do next, not just with Andrew, but with his own life. "I'm not doing this for you," Michael said quietly, his gaze never leaving Andrew. "I'm doing this for me. You took everything from me, but I'll rebuild. I'll be stronger than you ever will be." With those final words, Michael turned and walked out of Andrew's house, leaving the man behind. He didn't need to prove anything. The truth was out there, and now it was time to face it. If you're hooked on Michael's journey, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. This isn't over yet. The truth is still unraveling, and Michael is about to make some major decisions. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this intense story. Michael's thoughts were a whirlwind as he left Andrew's house. He could feel the tension building inside him with every step. He had confronted Andrew, but that hadn't brought him any closer to understanding what had happened between him and Laura. There was something about this whole mess that still didn't sit right. The more he thought about it, the more questions flooded his mind. He needed closure. He needed to know why she did it. The cold night air hit his face as he stepped outside, but he hardly noticed. His mind was too consumed with everything that had happened, with the words that were still ringing in his ears. "She'll choose me. She wanted me, Michael." He couldn't shake them. Andrew's smug confidence had only added fuel to the fire. It was a power play, a manipulation. Michael could feel it, and it made him want to rip everything apart. As he drove back to the apartment, Michael was torn. What should he do now? Part of him wanted to take the evidence, the photos, the proof of the affair, and lay it all out in front of Laura. He wanted her to see the consequences of what she had done, to make her feel the full weight of her betrayal. But there was another part of him, maybe the stronger part, that knew that nothing would ever fix this. Nothing would undo the damage. Laura's lies were bigger than the affair itself. It was the lies that had destroyed everything. He couldn't forgive her for that. He couldn't forgive her for making him feel like a fool, for making their life together feel like a house of cards, ready to collapse with a single breath. When he got back to the apartment, the place felt empty. The quiet, the stillness, everything felt wrong. Laura wasn't home. Michael wasn't sure if that was a relief or a new level of torment. He sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in his hand. It buzzed again. A message from Laura. He hesitated before opening it, already knowing what it would say. "Michael, we need to talk. I'm sorry. Please come home. I love you." The words were a slap to the face. After everything that had happened, After the lies, the betrayal, and the pain, she still thought a simple "I love you" could fix it all. It made his stomach churn. Michael stood up, his hands shaking. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't stay in the apartment, in the life they had built together, pretending everything was fine when he knew it wasn't. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to let Laura control the narrative any longer. Character dynamics. A crumbling marriage. Michael drove straight to Laura's office. He didn't text, didn't call. He was done with playing games. He was done with the uncertainty. The truth had to come out now, and he wasn't waiting for Laura to give it to him in bits and pieces. When he arrived at her office, the lights were off. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that made everything feel eerie. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. The building was empty, save for the echo of his footsteps. It was then that he saw her. Laura was standing near her desk, looking out the window, her back to him. She hadn't heard him enter. For a moment, Michael stood there, staring at her. The woman he had once loved, the woman who had made him feel like the luckiest man alive, was now the source of his greatest pain. "Laura," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. She turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. The tears that had been in her eyes earlier were now gone, replaced with a coldness that mirrored his own. "Michael," she started, her voice weak. "No," he interrupted, walking closer. "Don't even try. I've had enough of your lies. I've had enough of you pretending like everything is okay. You lied to me, Laura. You betrayed me. And now you want me to come back like nothing happened." Her mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. She was silent, her hands trembling at her sides. Michael could see the fear in her eyes now. Real fear, not the defensive act she had been putting up. This was the fear of a woman who knew her world was falling apart. "You have nothing left to say to me?" Michael continued, his voice getting louder, more intense. "You've already destroyed everything." "Michael, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I made a mistake. It was just a mistake. A stupid mistake that I can't undo. But I love you, Michael. I love you." Michael's laughter was bitter, cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. "Love? Is that what this is about? You think love means lying to me? You think love means going behind my back, sneaking around with another man?" She took a step toward him, but Michael held up his hand to stop her. "No, Laura. You don't get to walk up to me like everything is fine. You don't get to ask for forgiveness after you've destroyed everything we built." Laura's face crumpled, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But please, Michael, just listen. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You don't get to apologize anymore," he said harshly. "It's too late for that." He turned away from her, heading for the door. But then he stopped. He knew there was something he still needed to say, something that had been eating at him since he first found out about the affair. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice cold as ice. "But you'll have to live with it. Not me. I'm done. I'm done with you." Pivotal moment, the choice. Michael left the office with a finality he had never felt before. As he stepped into the elevator, his heart was pounding. He wasn't sure what had changed inside him, but something had. Something deep within him had broken, and he realized he could never go back to the life he had once known. There was a weight lifted off his shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by the realization that the future he had imagined was gone. The woman he thought he knew was gone. The life they had built together, gone. But even in the midst of his heartbreak, Michael felt something else. It wasn't just pain. It was something more powerful. It was freedom. As he stepped out of the building and into the street, the cold night air hit him, but he barely noticed. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of clarity. He had taken control of his life. He had made his choice, and now it was time to move forward. If you've been captivated by Michael's journey through betrayal and heartbreak, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. This story isn't over yet. There's still a lot left to unfold. The following days felt like an eternity for Michael. Every second, his mind raced, running through the events, the betrayal, the lies. He couldn't shake the image of Laura's face, the way she had pleaded with him, begging for his forgiveness. But nothing about her apology had felt genuine anymore. She hadn't just betrayed his trust. She had taken everything, his love, his life, and his sense of self-worth. There were moments when Michael's anger flared up, hot and burning. He could feel the rage coursing through his veins. But it was different now. It wasn't just about Andrew anymore. It wasn't even about Laura. It was about Michael, about the man he had become since he found out about the affair. He couldn't keep pretending. He couldn't keep living in a house filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. He had to move forward. He had to let go of everything that had held him back, and that included Laura. But even as he prepared himself to walk away, a small part of him wondered if he was doing the right thing. Was he letting anger cloud his judgment? Was there still a chance to salvage the wreckage of their relationship? But as the hours passed, the answer became clear. No, this was no longer about repairing what was broken. This was about reclaiming his life. Character dynamics. Michael's struggle and Laura's desperation. Laura hadn't given up. She still believed that there was a chance for them. Every morning, she would text him. Every night, she would leave him messages. They were filled with apologies, promises, and desperate pleas. She loved him, she swore. She had made a mistake, and now she was ready to do anything to fix it. But Michael was no longer listening to her words. The sweet, familiar tone of her voice had become hollow in his ears. Every time she reached out, it felt like a reminder of how deeply she had hurt him. He couldn't just forgive her. He couldn't go back to the way things were. And yet, as he sat in his apartment one evening, reading one of her messages, he realized that despite everything, he still cared. It wasn't love anymore. Not the kind of love he once had for her, but something else. He had given so much of himself to this woman, to their marriage, that it was hard to just throw it all away. But as Michael stared at the message on his phone, he heard a knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat. Was it Laura again? Or had it been someone else? He opened the door to find a stranger standing there, holding an envelope. The man was wearing a suit, looking every bit the professional. "Mr. Crawford?" the man asked, his voice calm and respectful. "I have something for you." Michael took the envelope without a word, watching the man's retreating figure as he walked back down the hallway. Inside the envelope, Michael found a letter, signed with Laura's name. His heart clenched as he unfolded it. "I know you're angry, and I don't blame you. I don't expect forgiveness, not after everything I've done. But please know that I love you. I made a terrible mistake, one that I can't undo. But I need to explain everything. Please meet me tonight at the park. We need to talk. It's the only way I can make things right." The words felt like a final plea, a last attempt to fix what had been shattered. Michael stared at the letter for a long moment, debating whether he should go. Part of him was furious, but another part of him felt the familiar tug of hope. The hope that somehow, some way, things could still be fixed. But as he thought about it, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't let this woman manipulate him again. This was his chance to finally close this chapter and move on. Plot's pivotal moment. The confrontation at the park. That night, Michael drove to the park. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows over the empty paths. The park was eerily quiet, save for the rustling of leaves in the trees. Michael parked his car and got out, his breath visible in the cold night air. He looked around, but there was no sign of Laura. The anticipation gnawed at him, and the anger he had buried for so long began to rise again. Then, out of the shadows, he saw her. Laura stood at the edge of the park, her silhouette illuminated by the streetlights. She looked smaller, more fragile than he remembered. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale in the dim light. For a moment, they both just stood there, looking at each other, as if the weight of everything that had happened was too much to process. "I shouldn't have asked you to come here," Laura said finally, her voice trembling. "But I need you to understand, Michael. I need you to understand why I did it." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. The words felt like a slap to the face. He had already heard all of her excuses. He wasn't going to sit here and listen to them again. "Stop, Laura," he said, his voice sharp. "I don't need your explanations. I don't need your excuses. What you did, it's unforgivable. I can't fix this. You can't fix this. It's over." "But Michael." "No," he interrupted, his voice rising. "It's over. You made your choice. You chose him over me. You chose to lie, to betray everything we had, and now you want to pretend like it didn't happen. But it did, Laura. And I can't keep pretending like everything is fine." Laura stepped forward, reaching out for him, but Michael took a step back. His eyes were hard as steel. "No, Laura. Don't touch me. You don't get to do this." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, but Michael couldn't bring himself to feel pity anymore. She had crossed a line, and no matter how many apologies she offered, it wouldn't change what she had done. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could control it, that it would just be a fling. But it wasn't. I was selfish. I hurt you, and I can't fix it." For a long moment, Michael just stared at her, the weight of everything between them heavy in the air. He took a deep breath and shook his head. "I know you're sorry," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change anything. I've been living with this anger, this pain, for far too long, and I can't do it anymore." Michael turned and walked away from Laura, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was the right thing. He had to let go, for his own sake. If you're hooked on the drama unfolding in Michael's life, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. This story isn't over yet, and you won't want to miss what happens next as Michael makes a crucial decision for his future. The days that followed felt like a fog, a blur of emotions that Michael was still struggling to process. Walking away from Laura that night at the park had been one of the hardest things he'd ever done, but it also felt like a weight had been lifted from his chest. There was no going back. The life they had built together was gone, and it wasn't just because of the affair. It was everything: his trust, his love for her, his belief in their future. All of it had been shattered. But as time passed, Michael realized that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the acceptance. Accepting that his relationship with Laura had come to an end. Accepting that his heart had to heal, and accepting that he could no longer live in the past. He had to move on. Michael threw himself into his work, focusing on his career with a determination he hadn't known he was capable of. He had spent so many years of his life focused on the relationship, on trying to make things work, that he had neglected the parts of himself that needed attention. Now, he took time for himself. He made decisions based on his needs, not anyone else's. It was liberating. Yet, even with all the progress, there were moments when he found himself staring out the window of his apartment, reflecting on the time he had spent with Laura. He wondered what could have been if things had gone differently. But he also understood that he was stronger now. And sometimes you have to let go of the past to make room for a better future. Character development. Michael's growth. One evening, as Michael sat on the couch, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from his lawyer, a final update on the divorce settlement. He had expected it, but somehow seeing the confirmation that everything was finalized hit him harder than he thought it would. His marriage, once full of promises and dreams, was now just paperwork. He stared at the screen, feeling both a sense of closure and a deep sadness. But even with the sadness, there was relief. He had walked away from a toxic relationship, one that had kept him in the dark for far too long. And now he could move forward. It was time for Michael to reclaim his life. No longer would he be trapped by the mistakes of others. He had learned that life could be messy, that people could betray you in ways you never imagined, but that didn't mean it had to define you. Michael wasn't a victim. He was a survivor, and that gave him the power to make the life he wanted. He looked out the window again, this time not in sorrow, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The city was alive outside, busy, vibrant, and full of possibility. Michael had always been part of that world, but he hadn't truly lived in it. Now he was ready to take on whatever came next. Laura's fate, a hard reality. Meanwhile, Laura was struggling with the aftermath of her actions. The guilt that had weighed on her since Michael's departure had only intensified, and no amount of apologies or attempts to make things right could undo the damage she had caused. She had tried to salvage what she could, reaching out to Michael, contacting his friends, even trying to explain things to her family, but none of it worked. The trust had been broken beyond repair. She was left to face the reality of her choices. Her affair with Andrew had been more than just a betrayal of her marriage. It had been a betrayal of herself. She had lost sight of who she was, of what she wanted. The relationship with Andrew was over, too, as quickly as it had begun, and the emptiness left behind was something she wasn't sure she could fill. In the weeks that followed, Laura made attempts to rebuild her life. She started therapy, hoping to understand her actions and what had led her down this destructive path. She made amends with her friends and family, trying to gain back their trust. But deep down, she knew it would never be the same. She had made irreversible decisions, and now she had to live with the consequences. The aftermath, moving on. Months passed, and life continued to move forward for Michael. He hadn't heard from Laura in a while, and though part of him still thought about her from time to time, he had learned to put her in the past where she belonged. He had met new people, forged new friendships, and discovered passions he had long ignored. He was rediscovering himself, and with that came a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. One evening, Michael found himself sitting at a bar with some friends. They were celebrating a successful deal at work, and for the first time in a long while, Michael felt like he could breathe again. He was no longer weighed down by the pain of his past. The future was wide open, and it was his for the taking. As he raised his glass in a toast, Michael couldn't help but think about the lessons he had learned. Betrayal had shaped him, yes, but it had also shown him his own strength. He had survived, and more than that, he had thrived. He was in control now, and nothing, no one, could take that away from him. The final closure. A new beginning. A few weeks later, Michael received a letter. It was from Laura. He had been expecting it, but he wasn't sure what it would say. He opened it cautiously, his fingers trembling slightly. Michael, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I'm writing this because I need you to know that I regret everything. I regret the lies, the hurt, and the way I destroyed the person you were to me. You were everything to me, and I am sorry for taking that away. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I will carry this with me for the rest of my life. I hope that one day you can find peace. I know that I won't. He read the letter twice, letting the words sink in. Laura's regret, her pain, it was all too little, too late. And yet, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. He had no intention of reaching out to her, but knowing that she understood the consequences of her actions, that she saw what she had done, allowed him to finally close that chapter in his life. He folded the letter, placing it carefully in the drawer. It was time to move on fully. He had already forgiven himself, and that, he realized, was all that mattered. The final scene, embracing the future. As the weeks turned into months, Michael continued to rebuild his life. He grew closer to his friends, met new people, and embraced opportunities he had once feared. Slowly, he began to realize that the future was what he made of it. It wasn't about what had happened in the past. It was about what he chose to do with the rest of his life. And as he looked out over the city one evening, feeling the breeze against his face, he smiled to himself. The pain was fading, the scars were healing, and he was ready for the next chapter. If you've followed Michael's journey and want to hear more stories of resilience, growth, and overcoming the toughest challenges, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. There's always more to learn, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.